Okay, so we have our chairman, Julian Tagg, here this morning for a chat about the club in general and his particular memories of the club. Jules, you've been around this place for a very, very long time, and they always say that football clubs kind of choose you rather than you choose them. So what's your earliest memory of even setting foot inside this place?
This stand, actually.
Just this stand here?
This stand,
yeah.
Yeah, so in the cowshed. I think that's my earliest memory, because when you go back that far, then Peter Shearing in goal. That was one of my first memories. So yeah, being in this stand, I can't remember who I was with, because I was certainly never with my father. He was never interested in football at all, so never got the interest from that. A friend of my mother's used to take me to the police football, J Division, so that's probably where I got my interest. And then this chap was a policeman, so he used to bring me, it was a police officer who would bring me to the matches. That's how I became a ball boy, through coming to the matches with him. And I think the strongest memory and earliest one, which I would remember, apart from those, it always seemed to be dark and wet and rainy when I used to come here. The one, of course, was the Man United game. That was sort of, I think I must have been about 11 years old.
Were you a ball boy for that?
I was a ball boy for that, but there's a better story behind it, actually, because the guy was, the policeman that bought me was obviously working that day, and he got me a ticket and had my tracksuit on, so I became a ball boy by default almost. And I sort of worked out that I'd come in through the old stand over there with him, and I can remember this very clearly. I came into the old stand with him, and I still had my ticket in my hand, so I realised I had a fully bona fide ticket. So I remember in the railings over there, exchanging, I can't remember how much for, I think it was just face value, because it was on through the fence, just at the back of the grandstand on the jungle path, exchanging with somebody as a little, I don't know, I guess 10 or 11, something like that, and then sort of not knowing whether I was going to get the money. My first effort at ticket touting. So, and then I was a ball boy for that game down in this corner here. Although that's where I used to stand very often, either in this stand or down in the corner, because that's where the tea hut was, and the pies and the pasties. And there was a ball boy down in this corner for the Man United game, and of course I can remember a lot of that very, very clearly. Alan Banks, and of course you remember all the big names. George Fitzpatrick was one that made a big memory on me, because his hair was down here, something I remember. So I suppose those are the various very earliest memories of playing. And one of those players, I think at that time or close to, was playing fullback, was Cecil Smythe.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting one, because John Newman and Tony Long came around my house as a 14-year-old when I was in South Avenue. I remember them knocking on the door unannounced, as would happen in those days, and asked for me to sign schoolboy forms. And there was very few people on schoolboy forms in those days. And I played in the Western League, and I played against, I can't remember the teams I played against, but Dick Plum was playing for them. I was playing against him, and I think I must have been probably 15 by the time I played the first game. Chard Town. Dick Plum was up front for the opposition, and Cecil Smythe was behind me, and I was playing on the left wing, would you believe? So that was my first game, and I remember that very, very clearly. So that was a sort of a big jump in my memories. But so from ball boy to remembering those players to actually playing with one of them as a 15. I must have been 15 by that time, but that was very young to be playing in that level of football. Western League was slightly different then than it is now.
And of course, those were the days when I think we used to put 3 teams out, didn't we? Here, we had a Western League team, and it was about that time we had a team in the Extreme District League as well.
That could well have been. I know Mike had a team later on. Mike put a team in the in the Extreme District League, and that became the reserve team. But back in those days, I believe it was just the Western League team, and I actually remember watching. It must have been a reserve game, because I remember Alan Pinckney playing, of course, at St Luke's. When I eventually went to St Luke's, but I can remember him playing. But I remember him playing because I remember very clearly, strange what comes back, the blue quarters that Luke's used to play in. So the reserve team games here were St Luke's, as in effect, and Pinckney was one of those there. So that's another memory that I have, and that must have been, I'd love to put a timeline of those dates together, because sort of as you get to my age, it sort of gets a bit glossy down there. But I'd like to do that one day with a timeline. I suppose my other early memories would be I played here with Ladysmith School as a 13-year-old in the cup final. I can't remember who that was against. So that would have been the first time I played here. And then I played again at 15. And that was against Exmouth Town. So playing in the cup finals here in these changing rooms, and again, lots of people have heard it before, because I always say they're built in 1927, and I played here first as I must have been about 13 or so, and the changing rooms are no different, and I'm heading for 60 any minute now, so they're no different then than they are now.
So they might change in the near future, and we'll come to that a lot later.
Yes.
Now, of course, there was that quite landmark game with St Luke's last ever match v Chelsea here. Have you got memories of that one in May 1978? And I quote, we have Julian Tagg with some great 1970s hair. That's fantastic.
People used to think I had that permed, but it's not. Unfortunately, that's natural.
I was hoping you were going to say it's permed, but
it's not. No, of course. Soonists and all the people in the day, that was what everybody was. So I didn't have to do a thing. All I had to do is get out of the shower and leave it alone, and that's what happened. And there's lots of those pictures of me at that age, which why I didn't have it cut shorter, I really don't know.
And of course, you were 21 at the time. You'd already played for Devon under-18s and the reserves here before coming to college in '75. And of course, that quite significant. The fact that you were the captain of the college first team in that last ever game.
Yeah. And it was funny because actually I was playing Western League here as a 17, 18-year-old. Bob Wilson, I think, was the manager at that point. And I was playing in the Western, and then I went to St Luke's. And at that time, St Luke's ran a team in the Western League as well, and they also ran a team in the South Western League. And so, having played for 2 or 3 years here in that Western League, I couldn't get into the college side, because in that side was Forbesy, Mitchell, Johnny Ball, Ray Shinners, a whole load of boys, 5 or 6 in that first. So I didn't get into the second year, couldn't even get into the college team, having played Western League at this level at a professional club. So that was, galling for me. I was, couldn't quite, but it was quite right when you looked at the calibre of the players up there. But then played the next year, and then of course became captain, and then had the honour of doing that for the last game.
And what was that game like in terms, numbers of people here? And do you remember some of the opposition that you came up against, this Chelsea 11?
I didn't remember. Of course, there weren't names at the time, and there are a few, if you look through the programme, that did quite well in football. None of the very, very big names. I think Wilkins' brother is one of the names in there.
Dean Wilkins.
But I'm not sure, but there's names there that had a career in. But that game really was for me was actually quite sad. I went to a college that's football was a fantastic level, and to see that. The university don't seem to do the same thing at all now with the football, although I'd very much like to return to those days where we were attracting very good, intelligent footballers to come and do degree courses and to play football. And we've got plenty of them. Our managers are a reflection of that kind of educational standard, so I think there's lots more we could do. But that game I remember was actually quite. There was a lot of people here. Yes, it was packed out. You can imagine all the sort of the Luke students and Chelsea coming, of course. So it was a real mix. And I mean, all sides of the ground were open. I couldn't remember the numbers now.
Yeah.
We had a big dinner down at Dawlish afterwards, Sir Stanley Rouse and Wally Rice were both there, and I can't remember which, but one or the other of them spoke as well. So yeah, it was a really important day and an important game. But in a way, for me, it's the last game that St Luke's would play was sad, because I was very committed to it, and I'm still very committed to St Luke's and the university.
So I mean, moving on from that, I mean, then I think kind of looking back on your time connected with the club, it was a few years after that you were heavily involved in as you still are, but I mean heavily involved out at the Cat and Fiddle with the youth work. So how did that come about in terms of you get to take this interest in the youth development here at this club?
I got a bad knee injury at about 23, 24, something like that. And actually the funny thing was when I'd finished playing what I call at the level I was playing at Exmouth, semi-professional, got my degree, so I was playing for them, and got a bad knee injury, and I knew it was sort of the end of my footballing career, and I came back and played here for Mike Radford, and first game I played for the reserves, and of course that was in the local Devon and Exeter League, which was a lot lower level, ironically. I scored the winner at Cliss Valley in the first game. That's just one of those things you remember. And Mike asked me to come back and help him, so I was a player manager. Phil King was playing at that time, and then Mike went with the first team, so I then became player manager of the reserves at something like 23 or 24, but I could still play at this level, but as the further it went on, the worse the knee got. And I didn't enjoy managing at all. I loved coaching. As a career coach, I got my coaching badges at 19 at the college, so I was always into the coaching side, but I just didn't like the managerial side. I enjoyed it when I was player managing. I enjoyed that. But I didn't enjoy the manager side. So after about, I think it was probably a year or so, played for 1 year and then player managed the year after, because Mike was going with the first team then. But then, that was it. And then I had a big gap from football because I couldn't play anymore. I almost left football alone. And in answer to your question, it was only really when my son got interested.
Yeah.
I was a point when, because I couldn't play football anymore, having played every night of the week and every Saturday, every Sunday, everything I possibly could, to not being able to play at all, my knee would just explode. And it's coming out very shortly, actually, so I managed to hang on. Then my son got interested, and at about 9 or 10, wasn't interested in football. Suddenly, Klinsmann did his dive. Suddenly my son is interested. He's interested in Spurs, which was always my team as a youngster. Jimmy Greaves was the player I liked. Mike England was the one I always watched because I was a centre half. So all those things fitted together by accident. He started playing the local leagues, and you can imagine my personality. The next thing, I'm taking over the team and the coaching and all the rest. So I got to know and understand the local leagues, the under 10 and 11 year olds leagues. I knew the Sidmouth boys, the Ottery boys, the Honiton boys, the Exeter boys, all the four or five Exeter teams. So then with Mike and Kevin Hack, actually, Mike said put together a young team, because they never had an under 11s team. So of course it was very easy, because I knew all the boys I was trying to stop on a Saturday. We knew Ian Corrick at Sidmouth, and was Dean Moxey was at Pinhole with Toby, actually, and so on. So we knew all the kids. Sean Canham was with Toby in the team. So all those players we knew. So we put them together into a under 11 team. And then the year after, so that was running, we had 4 or 5 sort of casual fixtures. And then the year after, the Football League programme came on board. Eamon Dolan got involved, and then it became a professional programme of fixtures with some grant money. So they applied for that. And then, of course, Eamon became like a brother to me, and we spent 7 or 8 years building it from one team of 11-year-olds, of which one, of course, was Dean, into nearly 200 children. And I knew pretty much every one of them and every parent, and worked alongside Eamon. When I think back now, the hours, just no wonder I was still single then. Just phenomenal hours of putting it all together. And I coached that team of under 12s, and my career was in a career coach, particularly in skill acquisition and sports psychology. So when I used to take those teams, I would do an hour in the classroom and an hour on actually probably because we only had an hour in the gym at the college, that's all we could, it's the only practice area we could get. But I did a lot of the practical application of the sports psychology and the skill acquisition with young kids, as we are doing now in the academy, which was sort of light years ahead of what anybody does now. And I speak to Dean Moxey, and he still remembers a lot of that, and some of the other players that went on. Colin Marshall, who went on to Aston Villa, played in the Youth Cup, and they remember some of that stuff, because that's when it should be implanted. So it became a little bit of a practical experiment for me as well. Can I use the stuff that I use in the classroom every day? Can I actually put it on? So I coached those boys through to 16, and then I took, so that must have been 5 or 6 years, and then I took the 16s for probably 2 or 3 years more, until, we won't go into it, but John Cornforth gave me the sack, but that's another story which we'll go into another time. So yeah, that's the background.
So and that I think is very clear to everyone, how the kind of youth development is still such an important part of where you come from now. But just if I take you on a few years, I remember bumping into you in the in the Aussie bar down in town, and it was about 2002. This was a Friday night, and it was about that time I remember that either Doble was about to sell his shares and there were, or relinquish
Lots going
control
on,
of the
yeah,
club. There was a
yeah.
lot happening, and obviously you were actually part of a consortium headed by Joe Gadsden. I think Messrs Russell and Lewis were on the other side in terms of there was more than one group of people interested. How did you get involved in suddenly going from someone who was very closely involved with the youth screen to someone who's going to look at things further up the line, as it were?
Well, Joe Gadsden was a director at the time, but Joe was actually really a very, very good. Of course, he was a good player in his day. He played centre forward and scored a lot of goals here, but he was also a very good coach. Joe was an excellent coach, so he was very involved in the centre of excellence, and he pushed quite hard for me quite a lot to become involved more in this side of the in the boardroom side, and I became an associate director in Ivor's time actually, really so that I could get what I want in the youth, because nobody really knew how to accelerate it or how to improve it or how to get finance into it, or there was nothing. There wasn't, Mike used to run his team very successfully, which was an under 15 team, and then they would come on to be but that was it. There was no progression through, from 8-year-olds. So Joe was the one who pushed me into it strongly. Joe was, of course, his Steve Perryman connection. Joe brought him down when the team was in trouble, and that's how I met Steve. And it was because of it I became an associate director, primarily really because I wanted to have almost carte blanche in the youth. I knew what needed to be done. I knew how much opportunity there was, and I knew actually, I remember the conversation, here's a good one for you. I remember the conversation just over there with Mike Radford, and I remember saying to him about, he used to, come, ready, get me tickets now and again. So Mike, some great things going on in under 10s and 11s football in Exeter. I said the oranges are up, the nets are up, the organisation is good. But I said, there's no coaching, there's absolutely no professional attempt to improve these boys.
Yeah.
He said, well, why don't you start a team? That's how it started, Raddy saying that to me over there. And that's where that under 11 team first came from. But in terms of actually getting involved, then there was nobody really knew. Of course, Eamon was huge in it, don't get me wrong. We did it very much together, and Eamon was full-time and did a fantastic job. But then my influence in the boardroom, certainly as an associate director initially, then sort of opened me up to all the politics and everything was going on. So the first consortium was really more about, lots of people were, whilst they were looking at that point, Ivor and his other directors at that time were looking to get out of the football club, and I did due diligence with an actuary, with Joe and 2 other people, who had an actuary come down, and the amount of debt was far beyond 2.4 million. It was far beyond anything that we could get. And I sort of realised, I'm looking around thinking, I know who's going to be doing all of this. So that's why we didn't get involved, and that's why Russell and Lewis then sort of carried on and then took over at that soon after that point, when we said, because of course there was Steve, who was a guy called Steve McPherson, who was a friend of Joe's, who was a finance man, if you like. He knew about how to go through CVAs and so on, which was completely, I had no idea. And I certainly didn't know how to run a football club. So with all those things in my mind, I'm thinking this is far too much money. The debt at that point wouldn't have been public knowledge. It was too much, and I spoke to Steve in Japan regularly. That's where Steve was at the time, because this was all going on. So this is beyond us. Which is somewhat ironic, because after Russell and Lewis went, and I really got involved then because they were going to shut the youth down for no other reason. I already knew that the youth was going to be closed. So I didn't even think then about putting my name on the 2A8 in the boardroom. You have to have 3 people to do that to take the club over. And little did I know it was going to be 4.8 million a year later, so I'd probably be better off the first time round. But of course, that's history, and that's why we're sat here.
So at that time, we were looking at, obviously,
it was 2002.
Russell and Lewis came in 2000. I remember you saying to me that down in the pub, you were saying, basically the amount of debt is what's putting me off, because I'd come across you at the Cat and Fiddle when I'd taken school trips out. And here's a good story. I think I was driving a minibus out there, and it was a classic bit of work where there was a lot of loose aggregate, and as I was trying to reverse out, the aggregate was going all over the place, and there was a little knock on the window from Mr. Tagg, and it was the one, I'll never forget this line. It was, and it was hugely appropriate. It was, with the greatest of respect, would you like me to have a go? And you then got in the minibus and literally did what I wasn't doing, which is going deeper and deeper and deeper into this stuff. And I thought, well, if nothing else, this guy knows how to get a minibus out of trouble. But so during the course of that year when Russ and Lewis were here, you know, you'd obviously knew more than we did on the side, though. You told me down the pub there were lots of debt, but it must have been difficult seeing that, you know, obviously this wasn't the right time to get involved. So that must have been the time, obviously, where the trust started to grow a little bit as an organisation. Must have been, but during the course of that year, I know it had been going on for a little bit before, because I've been to a couple of meetings out.
Yeah, Norman Warren
Thompson
actually.
Road.
Norman Warren, who I'd known when I was a footballer, actually at Ladysmith. He was at Heel School then, and Norman was one of the trust people and saw that it was a very good idea. And actually, one of the first things I ever did with the trust when they first started, I went to them and asked them for £2,000 for a kit, and I remember it was in the centre spot, which was down behind the big bank.
Yeah.
So I went there in front of all their committee. I remember Dave Drahan and Damien and all, they were all in there. So I had to go and present, this is what I'm going to do with the youth, this is what I want to do, you know, can you give me... And that was where the first £2,000 came from, a grant from because and of course youth has been in the front of their minds right the way through. But in terms of, I sort of got to know what was going on behind the scenes very much with Russell and Lewis. I knew who they were and just saw it going. You know, it was becoming. I tell the story lots of times. And I was on the radio, and Fitz was on the radio, and I was driving somewhere, and he said somebody from Plymouth phoned up and said they got Uri Geller, they got Michael Jackson. All they need now is Coco the Clown for the full set. And I was incensed because you know how the truth hurts.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought that's my football club, you know, that I'd grown up in and been a part of and was still connected to. That was a little switch that clicked in me then, thinking I need to do something. You know, it's all very well listen to it and see it. And then, of course, it started to. I managed to actually fit the OTR, which was that building, which was one of the factors. With the trust and with the club, with Ivor and Peter and all the others, and put them together in the room down there in the Foster's room, and we brought in a facilitator, Ed Probert, so came in and worked all the different, you know, and a very, very, very terrific piece of work. You know, when you see somebody really intelligent work out a problem and, you know, on a whiteboard and write, this is what do you think, how do we, and that was the catalyst to start to set something that everybody could agree on, because of course everybody had different views.
So we're talking now about the summer of
actually the
2003.
takeover. Yeah, we are. We're talking about the then you know, the takeover then of moving Russell and Lewis and all those factors. You know,
keeping the club going,
and keeping it running. And of course, I remember one of the things on this table here, with the lawyers and everything, and you know, that sort of they've made that progression, and the trust separately. I didn't have anything to do with that. Trust separately had paid for or bought them from Ivor, I believe, for 20,000. I wasn't part of that deal, so I guess that was done separately. But that's really what triggered it off. And what I was going to tell you a second ago, I'll come back to that, but Norman Warren took me to the Buckroll Lodge. There was a meeting out there.
Yeah, I've been to meetings out there, I remember back then.
I looked at it, I thought, there's no chance they haven't got a hope in hell. They're so far away from the reality. But it was still interesting to know there was that many people that interested. And then I saw one in the Fountain Centre. They had a meeting in the Fountain Centre, and Terry Pavey presented. And he presented what he was going to do, and I remember thinking, in about, I don't know, 2 or 3 years' time, they might have a chance to do this. Of course, it was, I don't know, about 8 months later, so you were sort of ejected into, you know, actually the trust taking over the club. But there was, you know, and then it was Ian Huxham, Terry Pavey and myself that came into this room, and we had to sign then the 2AA to take on the whole kit and caboodle, because whilst the trust were the owner, none of them had their name on. They had the responsibility of, on reflection, a pretty stupid thing to do. You know, sign up for that pretty, you know, without knowing what you were doing, which I didn't. All I knew was the youth was going to be closed, and I didn't care what it cost to keep the club going, because, as I say, I knew just best part of 200 kids and pretty much all the parents. Yeah. And I'd probably put, I don't know, by that point, 7 or 8 years of my life into it, at least. So I wasn't going to see that fall. And I didn't. whilst I knew what was going on, I didn't know how to run a football club, nor did I have any clue about how to conduct a CVA and all the legals and all the the background to actually trying to resolve a massive business which is connected hugely across the city, that's in complete turmoil, and taking it from a basket case to where it is now. So
I actually remember I think it was in the summer, I came here for something that first summer, and you were just going through I remember the list of players' wages, because you wouldn't have known that, and people were on contracts where they were going to be here even though we were starting again, and yet we were obliged to play them. And I remember you were sort of going through the list thinking, well, and there you are, so how are we going to pay him on that and him on that, and it must have been, I think at the time, I remember you were saying, that every day some other bombshell would drop, and I mean that must have been, to get through that summer and start the season, must have been a really kind of tough time, but to start the season must have been very rewarding, just to say we still got a club.
It was, you sum it up very well, actually. I sort of tend to forget those, but that was, stress and trauma of trying to, these people, they wanted their money, they're footballers, they don't want to know about, they just want to get paid on a Friday, and we've had that problem for plenty of years, that's sort of a recurring, but not at the kind of scale that it was then. It was very, very uncomfortable in every way, from not only not knowing how you're going to remember the last grandstand that we did. We raised 40,000 from the last grandstand, which sort of got us over a month or two. We managed to get rid of players. We managed to do. Justin was brilliant. He was part of the team from the legal team that came in to help us with the CVA, and I pinched him pretty quick because he was very proactive and positive in helping us. So he did an exceptional job in helping us actually pay off some of those players for some of the the small amount of money that was coming in from the Football League. We were allowed to use for that. So we did a massive, we had to contact all of them all at the same time and say, here is a percentage, and if I can get you all to agree, then we can do it. But if one or two didn't agree, you couldn't. So that's another conversation and another hour of actually how it worked. But those were amongst a million other problems and things you've got and just getting the safety certificate for the ground. But there was a lot of help. There was a lot of volunteers. There was a lot of people that were there's a lot of strength in adversity, and there was some real adversity. People, and I always say, my little saying, motivation is creating the right amount of fear, and there was plenty of fear, so everybody really did pitch in strongly. So there was a lot of people, but bear in mind that people don't realise that Terry Paley used to come down for 2 or 3 days a week in his camper van and park kind of thing, if you remember. Ian was still in the middle of his business, which he didn't really arrive here until sort of, I think it was nearly November, where he would be on the phone and come in the evenings. And whilst he was a brilliant orator, no doubt, Ian was a very good orator, did a great job in that respect. But he wasn't here, so it was pretty lonely. I'd retired from work, so I think it was May 2003. Sat in that office at the end thinking, right, what now? It was you find your way through it.
And I think that it kind of which sums up a lot of that period. I remember, and it'd be interesting to see how you think it's changed now. In terms of, used to say to me something about, do you remember those games on It's a Knockout, or even the ones you see on I'm a Celebrity, where you scrambling up, then someone throws a load of treacle, and then someone hits you over the head with a inflatable hammer, and it was it was all about the next obstacle, wasn't it? And I guess that must, in some ways that doesn't change even now, does it?
That hasn't changed a bit. It's exactly that. I think the way I have to look at it all the time is I look in front, and sometimes I get a bit despondent thinking, Christ, how are we going to achieve? There's so much to do. I look at the competition outside and the money that's being thrown even on and sometimes, then just every now and again, and I do it with the staff, look behind you and we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this, we did this. Look at what we've actually achieved, because sometimes you can be forever chasing that rainbow. So we've achieved, phenomenal, the story and the progress of where it was to where it is now. But you are quite right. Thanks for reminding me.
The It's Knockout. Remember that It's a Knockout game.
It's no different. It's a knockout now. Look at the look at the old grandstand. One of the reasons we're sat here. look at the old grads. If that's not an it's a knockout scenario, then never is. We've been trying to get that for 5. We've been trying to get to the end of that one for 5-6 years, and we still can't get there. Somebody keeps smashing us with a hammer as we get on the bouncy castle. So yeah, it's like that all the way through. Because you're in a league and a profession, and everybody's trying to climb over everybody. By definition, you gain success by getting somebody else below you.
I mean, I guess as we, as you look over that time, and the trust has remained very much at the heart of this club. And even looking at numbers of directors, the trust is becoming as important as it ever has been at any time with you as chairman. Why do you think that we as a club have managed to retain and in many ways even strengthen that model, whereas other clubs, I was thinking this morning off the top of my head, I was thinking of Notts County and Lincoln and maybe Chesterfield have sort of dabbled with the model and then kind of pulled away from it. How have we managed to keep it at the heart of what we do 13 years down the line from the early days?
There's two things really, careful how to answer really. Because people, they get in there and they think it's about picking a team. You pick a team on Saturday, you sign a few players, and running a football club's a monster. Everybody has an opinion, everybody has a part of it. And this is even more so because you have 3,000 people that have every right, they're members. So I think you end up, I don't know whether it's about maybe partly me and partly the team of people around that keep going, because I question myself on a daily basis. This takes your life up. Don't get it wrong. It's not. You don't come to work. It's more than that, and that's why I think. Again, it's not just about me. It's about an awful lot of people. You really have got to give up. You've got to really give up. Pretty much, you're in or you're out. And I think most people think that it's 10 times more difficult, especially when there's philanthropy around, where people can throw money and go past you without any kind of effort or cleverness or sustainability. That's really hard to take. You imagine you're going to be an Olympic athlete or something, you want to get to the top, but you've always got to do it with a stone tied around your waist, or one of your arms tied behind your back, or both arms, yet you still think you're going to win the race.
Yeah.
Sooner or later someone says, you know what, I can't win this race, I'm going to give up. And I think that's what happens.
So you think other clubs kind of use it as maybe a short-term goal and have ideals, but they're maybe not our circumstance, the way we took over, that everything collapsed, the relegation, the debt, the court cases, that it was almost, we hit the very bottom, and then maybe what you build from that, people feel stronger about it.
We found a way of doing it. Because of that, we found a way of doing it. There's no blueprint. There's no, you can't say, well, what did they do? Well, there's nothing like it. We're in the front of that league. You can't. There's no other example I see, and even some of the trust examples, they're very, very different to what Everybody says it's the same, but they're not. Each one of them is very, very, very original. Even Wimbledon are probably the closest to us and have done particularly well. But the other trusts, they come and go, and everybody has a completely different set of circumstances, exactly as you say. I think we've got some great people around here with some great staying power, and I think that's one of the main factors in actually achieving it. But it's and I think the other thing is that when clubs get in trouble, very often the first thing they do is take away the 150 odd thousand they have to put into the youth programme. That's the first thing that goes. Well, that's like a spiral, a downward spiral, because now you haven't got any youth players to play when you absolutely need them, just to play, just to good players to fill. And you certainly aren't going to sell them, are you?
No.
So the one thing that we did right was hold on to that, because if you really think about it, underneath Dean Mopsy, George Friend, Dan Seaborn, Grimesy laterally, Matt, all the players that we sold, those really are underpinning how we survive. So that money that comes in, split very often in one way. Sometimes it's all to the club, because there's things that you have to do. We had to put £45,000 into just keeping that thing open about 3 years ago. Just 45,000, and the numbers that you have to deal with are quite huge. So The trust is unique. It's very strong underneath in the principle. I absolutely love the principle of what we're doing and how we're doing it. And I do remember somebody, I won't tell the name, but somebody quite eminent in the city I met at a big open air gig actually, and said, you know what, never thought you had a chance. Somebody who I've had some respect for said, you know, well done, never thought you had a chance. And that's what lots of people actually think. It certainly is not easy, and this is a very, very difficult model. And as we go through all the time, we're breaking new ground every day almost, because the world that we're working in is changing. You know, when you see, I've said it very recently, and so is the manager. When you see Northampton 30 million in debt, and then suddenly somebody comes in and injects 10 million, striker worth God knows how much, playing when they played us that game. It's a little bit soul destroying. And then you see the likes of the Mansfield chairman very, very open and putting in huge amounts of money. Accrington with their millionaire that's turned up, the man who makes the plastic boxes, lovely chap, but he's just so. It's really difficult to you know, to keep on working. Well, this is going to be huge, significant. It's another shot in the arm for us. The rubber crumb pitch that we had that will help at the training ground in recruiting of players and bringing the next generations through. And people don't realise that you know, to do that out there was 10 years in the making. You know, Dean Moxey Dean was one of the younger ones. He was a year young. Dean was probably 9/10 when he started playing. So that's 10 years almost before he got what and it's the same. So it's a long process where you have to be determined over a long period of time. You can't sort of flip flop and, you know, change.
And I guess that kind of determination, sense of long-term purpose has underpinned the way we've appointed our managers. You know, actually we've got a very good record of consistency.
That was the second reason, you know, that continuity is hugely significant and important. You see it at every club. I was only reading the LMA, League Managers Association stuff on Friday, and I think in our league, the average now is 1.3, 1 year and 3 months. That's the average. But the continuity there, how can you have continuity in a club? How's he going to know what your under 16s look like, or your under 18s even? Never mind your 15s, or, you know, how it works. They're going to have no clue. And I suppose the other thing as well, there's another significant factor that's becoming more significant as it goes on. You know, Jamie Vittles used to be over in the shed over there in the little, you know, which is about to come down. That's where they started off, and that was where Eamon started actually. Eamon was football in the community.
Yeah, he was.
First.
Yeah.
And you know, that's grown. And for me, I've been chair of that now, which is some people sort of forget that, for I don't know, 15 years, something like that, registered charity, and that is now doing, I think about a year or so ago, 18 months ago, the turnover was about 350,000. This year's 520,000. At the end of this year it'll be 750. We're heading towards 1.2 million. And underneath the ethos of what the club is about, its community, by definition, that's what underpins it. Because if you speak to anybody, I see one of my jobs as making sure that everybody knows in the city knows what happens here, because I use the mantra, it's not about football.
Yeah.
Always, you've heard it a million times, it's not about football. And it's not for me, it's providing something that's commensurate with the city's needs, whether that be a leisure opportunity on a Saturday, whether that be an academy boy that comes through, you know, and there's 200 of them and 5% will make it, look after the 95% that don't, or whether that's the work that Jamie does in the football in the community, and the continuity there. It's still Jamie now for probably 14 years, 15 years, and that turnover and work that is done in the city, which you'll know from the football point of view.
Yeah.
Probably you'll know a little bit about the education side, less so the health and well-being side, but also the social inclusion. Is quite phenomenal, and that this city is beginning to understand what the football club does for it, not the other way around. So the city council, the county council, they didn't give us the fountain centre for fun. They gave it to us because we were doing more youth work, and we were being more constructive and better return on it than they could do. So the football club, what it brings to the city is actually huge. And to illustrate that, when we were putting through the reasons for why we should develop this stand, we had some research done by a company called Substance, and again we'll be taking this information out to the public later on. That's my next meeting. That's what I'm
Yeah,
working
yeah.
on next at 11 o'clock. And they came back. They're an international company. They work for the government and so on. They said, could you come in and look at what the value of what we do for the city is? Yes, that's what they said. They come in for a couple of weeks. They came back with the figures that says, for every pound we spend in the city gets £10 worth of value. And last year we did just under £5 million worth of work or value in the city. I mean, the first thing I did, as you would, is look at the mythology and the substance. Who are these people? And actually, when you read it, they erred on the side of caution in terms of their figures. So, that kind of work that we do in the community for the city is quite phenomenal. Especially as some charities say they're really pleased with £1.60 out of every pound, £10 out of every pound, and £5 million worth of value to the city. That's something to be proud of, irrespective. And people don't quite realise that it's all those pieces that fit together. They're all as important, whether it's the academy, football in the community, the trust itself, the club board that does the day-to-day. You put those things together, that's what makes it up. It's not one individual part of it. And I suppose my advantage is that I'm in all of them. I've been a member of the trust right from the beginning, and that's probably the one place where I spend the least time, if you like. Of course, I spend a lot of time with the 4 directors who are now club directors. But of course, the academy, which I've been in control of from the start, football in the community for 15 or 16, and the club as such, in various different guises.
So, Julie, we've been obviously waiting, as you said, 5 years, but I think a lot of us, as fans, you've been thinking, we will have to develop this place or possibly move. The decision was made to stay. What value added will the development bring, do you think, other than simple things like better accommodation for supporters, probably giving the club a new lease of life, just a fresh start? What do you think the development will bring?
I don't think it's not going to be hugely life changing, but in the first instance that was going to come down. So it just provides accommodation that we wouldn't have had. That was going to be closed. We've done, you remember as well as I do the meetings we went to that said, we got another year.
Yeah.
10 years ago. So the volunteers and everybody around have done phenomenal to keep it open. And actually, I walked in it the other day and I love it. In a way, I'm thinking, this is progress, but.
And it's history, isn't it? You get a sense of history there that you don't get anywhere else.
It's huge. Yeah, that's where I sat for ages before I wouldn't come over here. I was staying over there kind of thing. So. It is huge, but one, it had to be replaced anyway. So there's number one. Otherwise you lose your capacity. 2 is it'll be somewhere where people do want to go and have, but get rid of the posts will be a start. There's decent seating. There'll be decent toilet facilities for men's and ladies.
And as you say, if it's a family stand, so you've got that opportunity to
reinvigorate it. New changing rooms for the players over here, so there'll be more space under there. So the whole thing will be, what a nicer experience. 10 times nicer experience. It'd be interesting to see the migration, to see how many. We've actually had to, next door, we've knocked out some of the boxes to make a top end lounge there, really to get some of our, the high net worth people. So I thought it was important to look after both ends to a degree. So, I think it'll be a huge shot in the arm. Whether it'll be the answer to us being able to compete against, huge philanthropy, I'm not sure that it will. But we'll have to find our way in that. But that will be a huge shot in the arm. And I think we've got planning permission in for the Cat and Fiddle as well. That'll be another huge to have a rubber crumb pitch that the manager can train on from November through to January. Should make a big difference too. But that will be significant for a variety of reasons. Also, it's a fair old feat. David Lee's been asked to produce something which is at no cost and at no risk. It's not a normal starting point for somebody to we want a £2.5 million development, please. Can you, at no risk and no off you go? So it's just and I think the other thing is that there's no guarantees yet, but I'm very hopeful of doing something at the away end. And I work with the Health and Wellbeing. I work with the Exeter Cultural Partnership, which is about attracting more people to the city. And yes, we've got great. One of the things, we're playing. I don't know who we're playing. Hartlepool or whatever. Why don't you come to our city and have a look? It's a great. Said what, and come and stand in the away end? I don't think so. So that will be a great. That we can change that opportunity. And away fans in that stand as well. No reason why they can't or why they shouldn't. and that will reflect better on Exeter as a, rather than. I mean, I can't think of anything worse. And you've been.
Well, it was voted one of the worst, wasn't it? So
well, I'm embarrassed by it. I'm embarrassed by it. So that for me is equally as significant as the stand.
So, Julian, as we pull things to a close, there was one question which actually links everything, which I'm sure you'll enjoy. If you look on yourself in your time here as a player, as a ball boy, as a supporter, as someone involved with youth, as a director, that must make watching a game on a Saturday incredibly interesting in terms of the fact that which hat you wear and you think he should have made a better pass down there, that's going to cost the club this. Saturday must be a very, very interesting experience. That's one way of putting it, interesting, with all those different hats of how you would view a game
on lots of different levels. I'm very calm actually. I see people jump up and may score a goal and stuff. I will at the end sometimes, but I've been in it long enough to know that it's never over till it's over.
Yeah.
But the one time I do jump up, I find without even thinking is when one of our youth boys scores.
Yeah.
When Jordan scored, or when I don't even. That's funny, and I only caught myself doing that the other day. I can sit there, even at Liverpool we scored, and I'm like, okay, we'll see. I'll jump up at the end maybe, but everybody jumps up and I stay still, But when one of our boys scores. I just, how it's automatic? Well, that's...
There is a different
so I suppose
feeling.
that showed me something. I thought about that the other day. I suddenly found myself on my feet like that. I mean, I know Ollie scored against Plymouth, but I've done it before when Jordan scored just an ordinary goal. Or I remember when the lad who went to Forest Green.
James Norwood.
No. Winger.
Oh, Elliot Freer.
When Elliot scored, I remember out of my seat. And when Scott scored, I remember Scott scored a goal on his debut. Those are the things that get me out of my seat. But at the same time, I'm looking at this and I'm looking around the ground and weighing up the numbers and and that for me is, I'm thinking about Thursday's cash flow meeting. So it's on so many different levels. And then you'll often see me stand outside here rather than go in. And that's usually because I'm watching what one of the community boys are doing with what they're doing with the youth players, and I love watching that too, and I love seeing it organised. I was right behind that. I saw that in Marseille. I came back and said, this is what we've got to do. I've seen this before. So it's a variation on a theme, and we've done other things. So you're quite right. I've never really thought about it in those terms, but it's a good question because I see it on all the different levels, and then of course I run around here to make sure people are, our sponsors and so on are happy. So because of the commercial side to it, and then when there's smoke coming out the back of the grandstand, now I'm thinking, okay, now that's not ultimately my responsibility, and I'm the one who has to make the call about whether we, with the safety officers and with Justin and so on, what do we? So multifaceted is just more than a way of putting it.
But do you still find that you can there are times when you're thinking of how this result might affect all sorts of aspects and how people reacting up there and that sort of
absolutely.
thing?
Financially, and then it's the political, how the fans react to it and what it's going to be like at the end and how it reflects your mood of the staff during the week. It just keeps coming at you all the time. And if you've got financial worries in between that, which we've got ourselves in a good position now. We're planning now sort of 3, 4, 5 years. Although at the end of next year is going to be a challenge in itself because the grants money we'd have spent a lot of it on our facilities and on the playing side. So there's going to be another challenge coming up. So I've already got that in the back of my mind. But all those facets that go on and they're all like this. They're all interlinked. None of them are. They're all linked to something. Here's the next young player coming through. Did we fill the ground over there? Did Richard fill it with scouts or with a million levels? So
just very, very fine. If there was one, and you're looking on the, something we think, that it's really all worth it. Is there one game? Be it Wembley, cup games, derbies, promotion matches, whatever. Is there one game it might have been a very innocuous game that since, very much the rebirth of the club in 2003, one game we thought, this is what I did it for. On a personal level or on a overall level.
Well, I do remember thinking actually, my early objective was could I use my 20 years working in sports psychology. There's another question, my 20 years in sports psychology, to apply it to let one of these boys come through quickly.
Yeah.
And I think I sort of, in my mind, the job was done when Dean Moxey got on the pitch. That was sort of my objective. It was never to go. My objective at that point.
So whatever that game was, when you saw him, that moment.
That was when I thought, I've achieved what I wanted to achieve. Yeah. But of course, by then I'm being dragged into all sorts of other things. But that was a significant moment for me. And then, he was at Man United as well, and I suppose that was the big one. But there's all the the Wembley ones and the playoff ones are almost the Torquay. The Torquay away was some experience. Never mind Oxford away.
Yeah, no, exactly.
But both of those two, more so than Wembley in a way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's loads of them. Yeah. There's actually, I could talk to you about the 10 most important. Single most important games.
But it's interesting how. But interesting.
For me on a personal level, that was about my career as in sports psychology. From a financial point of view, you talk about Man United. From satisfaction point of view, you talk about progression. You talk about Torquay.
So it goes to all those hats again, really.
Yeah.
But it actually interesting to say that that you said that seeing a youth player who's come through the system step on the pitch, that kind of encapsulates for you what it's all about.
Still, yeah, and I suppose if you really put it into context, as a footballer, I don't remember anybody ever coaching me. I don't ever remember somebody saying anything other than, turn up.
Get out and do it.
I never had any. Yeah. Not that I did have some great people that were major influences. So, I think I've given, kids in Exeter, whether that's the 900 in our development centres, the thousands and thousands that are in the football in the community that feed into those 900, right the way through the kids in Exeter have got a chance to have quality or opportunity right from the beginning.
Okay, gents. Wonderful. Thank you, Terry. Could have gone on all day.